Story 1. I was home alone. But the house didn't feel empty. At 1:42 a.m., I heard footsteps upstairs. They weren't loud. They weren't rushed. They sounded like someone walking carefully, as if they already knew the layout of the house. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. And then I remembered something I had already checked that night. I was completely alone. It was the night before Christmas. Most of the neighborhood had gone quiet hours earlier. Snow had been falling since sunset, soft enough to absorb every distant sound. The streetlights outside gave the road that muted orange glow that only shows up in winter. I had the house to myself. My parents were visiting relatives out of state, and I'd stayed behind because of work. It wasn't the first time I'd been alone overnight, and it didn't bother me. If anything, I liked it. The house felt simpler when no one else was moving through it. I locked the doors earlier than usual, out of habit, checked the windows, turned on the porch light. Inside, only the living room lamp was on, casting a warm reflection against the Christmas decorations, still half-packed in boxes. The upstairs was dark. I stayed on the couch longer than I meant to, scrolling through my phone, half watching a movie I'd already seen. Everything felt normal, quiet, predictable. By midnight, I was tired enough to go to bed. Before heading upstairs, I did a quick walk through the house. Front door locked, back door locked. The garage door was closed, just like it always was at night. Upstairs, I checked the hallway windows and my bedroom door. Nothing out of place. I went back downstairs, turned off the living room light, and stood for a moment in the dark, listening. The house was completely still. That's when I went to bed. I woke up because something felt off. Not a noise, not a dream. Just that quiet awareness that something in the house had changed. I checked the time on my phone. 1:38 a.m. For a moment, I lay there listening. The heater kicked on, humming softly through the vents. Outside, the wind pushed snow against the windows. Then I noticed the light. A thin line of warm yellow spilling across my bedroom floor. I was sure I'd turned the hallway light off. I remember doing it. I always do. Still half asleep, I sat up and looked toward the door. The light wasn't bright, just enough to outline the crack beneath it. I told myself the switch must not have clicked all the way. That happens sometimes. I swung my legs out of bed and stood there for a second, listening again. The house was quiet. I opened the door and reached for the switch. The hallway light was already off. I stood there longer than necessary, staring down the dark hallway. Then I told myself I was overtired, shut the door, and went back to bed. 4 minutes later, I heard the footsteps. I stayed still, listening. The footsteps didn't come all at once. They were spaced out, measured. 1 step, a pause, another step. They moved along the upstairs hallway, slow enough that I could track them in my head. I told myself it was the house settling. Old wood. Temperature change. That happens at night, especially in winter. Still, I picked up my phone and turned the flashlight on. I opened my bedroom door again and leaned into the hallway. Nothing. The darkness stretched the full length of the corridor. The bathroom door was closed. The guest room door was closed. No shadows. No movement. I listened for another few seconds, then went back inside and closed the door. The footsteps didn't return. Eventually, I fell asleep again. The next time I woke up, it wasn't because of a sound. It was because the room felt colder. I pulled the blanket closer and checked my phone. 2:11 a.m. The thermostat sat on the wall just outside my bedroom. I could see the faint glow of its display through the doorway if it was on. I opened the door slightly. The thermostat screen was lit. It hadn't been before. I stepped into the hallway and stood in front of it. The temperature had been raised by 3 degrees. I stood there, staring at the numbers. I hadn't touched it. I don't adjust it at night. I never do. I like the temperature exactly where it is when I sleep. I convinced myself it must have been on a schedule, some automatic setting I'd forgotten about. I lowered it back down and waited to see if the screen would light up again. It didn't. I checked the rest of the house. Every door was locked. Every window was closed. The garage door was still down. The porch light outside was on, shining across fresh snow with no footprints anywhere near the house. Everything looked exactly how it should. Standing there, I felt embarrassed for even being unsettled. I went back upstairs and closed my bedroom door. I didn't sleep much after that. Around 2:40, I heard something again. Not footsteps this time. A sound like fabric brushing against the wall. Soft. Slow. It came from the hallway, right outside my door. I sat up in bed and held my breath. The sound stopped. I waited. Nothing else followed. After a minute, I told myself it was my coat. I'd left it hanging on the hook by the bathroom door earlier that evening. The heater turning on could have made it shift slightly. I stayed in bed, staring at the door, replaying the sound in my head. Eventually, my eyes drifted closed. The next thing I remember is waking up and realizing my bedroom door was open. I always close it when I sleep. Always. The hallway light was off. The house was silent. I got out of bed and stood in the doorway, listening. Nothing moved. I checked my phone. 3:06 a.m. I told myself I must not have latched the door properly. I closed it again, turned the handle to make sure it caught, and stood there for a moment longer than I needed to. Then I went back to bed. This time, I didn't sleep. I lay there with my eyes open, watching the shadow under the door. The house was quiet again. No footsteps, no fabric brushing the walls, no sound from the vents. Just that familiar nighttime silence, the kind that's supposed to feel safe. I checked my phone without unlocking it. The glow briefly filled the room. 3:14 a.m. I stayed in bed for a long time after that, listening for anything I could explain away. Nothing happened. Eventually, I told myself that if someone really had been inside the house, I would have heard more than that. A door. A stair. Something obvious. I turned onto my side and closed my eyes. The sound that woke me this time was small. A single, dull click. It came from the hallway, not loud enough to echo, not sharp enough to startle me fully awake, just enough to register. I sat up slowly, my eyes fixed on the door. The sound didn't repeat. I waited, counting my breaths. After a full minute passed, I got out of bed. I didn't turn on the light. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway. The house smelled different. Not bad. Not strong. Just not how it usually smelled at night. The thermostat screen was dark. The hallway light was still off. Everything looked exactly the same as it had when I'd checked it earlier. I walked to the bathroom first. The door was closed. I opened it. Empty. The guest room was next. Door closed. Empty. I stood at the top of the stairs, listening down into the living room. Nothing moved. I told myself that was it. That whatever had been happening was just my mind filling in gaps. I turned back toward my bedroom. That's when I noticed the floor. There were faint impressions in the carpet outside my door. Not footprints. Not clear enough for that. Just shallow, uneven marks, like the carpet fibers had been pressed down and hadn't fully risen back up yet. They weren't there earlier. I knew they weren't. They started near the stairs and stopped right in front of my bedroom door. I stood there, staring at them, trying to understand how they could exist without leaving anything else behind. No sound, no sign of entry, no reason. I didn't follow them. I went back into my room and closed the door slowly, making sure it latched. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and waited for morning. I didn't hear anything else for the rest of the night. No footsteps, no sounds from the hallway, no movement at all. When the sun finally came up, the house felt normal again. Warm, quiet, empty. The carpet outside my bedroom had returned to its usual shape. Later that morning, my phone buzzed with a notification from the security app. It was a summary report from overnight. No motion detected, no doors opened, no unusual activity recorded. I stared at the screen longer than I needed to. Then I noticed the timestamp. The system had logged a manual thermostat adjustment at 1:42 a.m., the same time I'd first heard the footsteps upstairs. The activity was marked as coming from inside the house. I never told my parents about what happened that night. I didn't have a reason that would make sense. But after that, I stopped sleeping with my bedroom door closed. Not because I was afraid of something coming in, but because I needed to be able to see the hallway, just in case the house decided not to feel empty again. Story 2. My security system detected someone. I was alone. At 2:17 a.m., my security camera sent a motion alert. I was already standing directly in front of it. The notification arrived 12 seconds late. I remember noticing that delay because I stood there waiting for it, just to make sure the system was still working. When the alert finally appeared on my phone, it was marked as motion detected, living room. I was alone in the house. I'd installed the system a few months earlier, mostly for peace of mind. Cameras in the living room and hallway, motion sensors on the doors. Everything connected to an app that logged activity down to the second. Wasn't anything fancy, but it was reliable. I checked it often, even when nothing happened, especially when I was home alone. That night, being alone didn't bother me. It was the night before Christmas, and the house felt unusually calm. Outside, snow had settled into clean, uninterrupted layers along the driveway and the yard. Inside, the heating ran quietly, keeping everything steady and warm. I went to bed, knowing that if anything moved, anything at all, my phone would tell me. That was the point of the system. Before sleeping, I did what I always did. I checked the app. No alerts. No errors. System status. All devices online. Satisfied, I locked my phone and set it on the nightstand. I woke up briefly just after 2, not because of a sound, but because my phone vibrated. A single alert. I unlocked the screen and saw it immediately. Motion detected. Living room. The timestamp read 2:17 a.m. Still half asleep, I frowned and waited for the live feed to load. The camera view appeared on my screen. The living room, dim and empty. No movement. No shadows. Just the soft glow from the Christmas lights I'd left on near the window. I told myself it was probably the heating system kicking on. Warm air sometimes triggered the motion sensor if the camera angle was just right. It had happened before. I watched the feed for another 10 seconds. Nothing moved. I turned the screen off and rolled onto my side. A few minutes later, curiosity got the better of me. I picked up the phone again and opened the activity log. The alert was still there. 1 entry. 1 detection. No follow-up events. What caught my attention wasn't the alert itself. It was the delay. According to the log, the system had registered motion at 2:17:04 a.m. The notification hadn't reached my phone until 2:17:16, 12 seconds. That wasn't normal. The system was usually instant. I stared at the timestamps, then locked the phone and set it back down. I told myself it was nothing. A temporary lag. Wi-Fi interference. That happens sometimes. Still, I didn't fall back asleep right away. I stayed awake longer than I wanted to. Not because I was afraid, but because my brain kept replaying the timestamps. The 12-second delay didn't make sense, but it also didn't prove anything. Eventually, I convinced myself it was just a minor system hiccup and let my eyes close. The next alert came at 2:41 a.m. My phone vibrated once. Motion detected. Hallway. This time, I was fully awake. I unlocked the screen immediately. No delay. The live feed opened right away. The hallway camera showed nothing unusual. The lights were off. The doors were closed. The end of the hallway disappeared into darkness exactly the way it always did at night. I sat up in bed and listened. No footsteps. No movement. No sound at all. I checked the activity log. Motion registered at 2:41:09. I glanced at the clock on my phone. It read 2:41. This alert had come through instantly. That made me feel better. I told myself the earlier delay had been a coincidence. Maybe my phone had briefly lost signal. Maybe the app had lagged while updating. That explanation fit. I watched the hallway feed for another half minute, then locked the phone and set it back down. 5 minutes later, it vibrated again. Motion detected. Hallway. Same camera. I didn't open the app right away. I stayed still, listening for something. Anything that would match the alert. Nothing. When I finally unlocked the screen, the feed showed the same empty hallway. The activity log now had 2 entries from the same camera, 5 minutes apart. I sat there, staring at them. I hadn't moved. Nothing else in the house had moved. Still, the system had reacted. I got out of bed. If something was triggering the sensors, I wanted to see it for myself. I stepped into the hallway and stood directly beneath the camera. looking up at the small black lens mounted near the ceiling. I waved my hand slowly. Nothing happened. I took a step forward. Nothing. Then, after a short pause, my phone vibrated in my hand. Motion detected. Hallway. I looked at the timestamp. It was 6 seconds behind my movement. That wasn't right. I waved my hand again. No alert. I stepped back. No alert. I waited, watching the phone screen. Nothing happened. I stood there longer than I needed to, testing it. Moving. Stopping. Waiting. The system didn't respond again. Eventually, I convinced myself that whatever had triggered the alerts earlier wasn't happening now. Maybe the sensor sensitivity was off. Maybe the camera needed recalibration. I went back into my bedroom and closed the door. From bed, I reopened the app and checked every setting. Sensitivity levels were unchanged. Detection zones looked normal. No errors, no system warnings. Everything was exactly how it should be. I restarted the app anyway. Then I restarted the hub. While it rebooted, the house felt unusually quiet, as if it were waiting. When the system came back online, a message appeared. System status. All devices operational. I set the phone face down on the nightstand and turned onto my side. This time, I expected another alert. None came. I lay there waiting for the next alert. It didn't come. The house stayed quiet. No vibrations, no notifications, no movement on the feeds. After a while, I started to relax again. The restart must have fixed whatever was causing the false triggers. That explanation felt reasonable enough to hold on to. I was just about to put the phone away when the screen lit up on its own. Motion detected. Living room. I sat up instantly. The timestamp read 3:09 a.m. I opened the live feed. The living room was empty. The Christmas lights near the window were still on, glowing softly against the glass. The couch, the coffee table, the doorway into the kitchen, all exactly as they should be. Nothing moved. I checked the activity log. The alert had registered at 3:08:51. The notification had reached my phone at 3:09:03. Another 12-second delay. The same delay as before. I stared at the screen, then slowly swung my legs out of bed. I walked downstairs quietly, phone in hand. Each step I took felt louder than it should have, but the house didn't respond. No alerts, no vibrations. When I reached the living room, I stopped directly beneath the camera. I stood still. Nothing happened. I waited. 10 seconds passed. Then my phone vibrated. Motion detected. Living room. I looked at the timestamp. 3:09:24. I hadn't moved. I hadn't shifted my weight. I hadn't raised my hand. I hadn't done anything at all. Still, the system had logged movement from where I was standing. I backed away from the camera and looked around the room. Nothing had changed. No doors open, no windows disturbed, no sound anywhere in the house. I went back to the app and opened the activity details for the alert. Under detection source, it listed the camera. Under trigger type, it read presence. That wasn't a setting I recognized. I'd never seen that word used there before. I checked the previous alerts from earlier that night. They all showed the same thing. Trigger type. Presence. I didn't stay in the living room after that. I went back upstairs, closed my bedroom door, and sat on the bed with the phone in my hands. The system stayed silent. No more alerts came in. No movement was detected anywhere in the house. For the rest of the night, nothing happened. In the morning, everything looked normal again. The app showed a clean system status. No errors, no warnings, no unusual activity. The activity log from the night before was still there, though. 3 motion events, 2 12-second delays, 1 detection labeled presence. I checked the system documentation later that day. There was no such trigger type. Motion, sound, tamper. Offline, but not presence. I didn't uninstall the system. I didn't replace it. I just stopped relying on it. Now, when I'm home alone at night, I leave the app open on my phone instead of trusting the alerts. Not because I expect it to warn me, but because I want to see what it notices before I do. Story 3. The door was locked from the inside. I was alone, but the front door was locked from the inside. I was the only one in the house. I stood there with my hand still on the handle, trying to understand how both of those things could be true at the same time. That night wasn't unusual in any way. It was quiet, late, cold enough outside that the house made those small, familiar sounds as it settled. The kind you stop noticing once you've lived somewhere long enough. I was alone, and I knew I would be. Everyone else had left earlier in the evening for Christmas. I'd chosen to stay behind. No plans, no schedule. Just a night to myself before the house filled up again the next day. I locked the door after they left. I remembered the sound it made, the solid click that told me it was secure. I hung my jacket, turned off the main lights, and left only a small lamp on in the living room. The house felt normal, comfortably empty. I made a simple dinner, rinsed the plate, and set it in the sink. I didn't rush. There was no reason to. Outside, the street was quiet, the windows reflecting only darkness and the faint glow of holiday lights from neighboring houses. Before going to bed, I walked through the rooms like I always did. Front door locked. Back door locked. Windows closed. Nothing out of place. I went upstairs, turned off the lamp, and went to sleep. I woke up sometime after midnight, not because of a sound, not because of a dream, just that sudden awareness that pulls you out of sleep without explanation. I lay still for a moment, listening. The house was quiet. No footsteps, no voices, no movement at all. I checked the time on my phone, 12:53 a.m. That's when I noticed the smell. It was faint. So faint that at first I thought I was imagining it. Something unfamiliar, mixed in with the usual scent of the house. Not smoke, not food, just different. I sat up slowly, trying to place it. The smell didn't belong to any room I could think of. I told myself it was probably coming from outside. Cold air finding its way in through the vents. That happens sometimes. I lay back down and closed my eyes. The smell didn't go away. It wasn't stronger. It was just there. As if it had always been there, and I was only now noticing it. I stayed awake longer than I expected, not because I was afraid, but because sleep didn't feel like the right thing to do. The house was too quiet in a way that didn't feel natural, like a room where someone has just stopped moving. I lay there, listening, The heater didn't turn on. The pipes didn't creak. Even the usual distant sounds from outside were missing. It felt like the house was holding its breath. After a while, I sat up in bed. The smell was still there. Not stronger. Not weaker. Exactly the same. It didn't drift or change the way smells usually do. It just existed, evenly, as if it belonged to the space itself. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood. The floor was cold under my feet. I stood there for a moment, waiting for something to happen once I moved. Nothing did. I opened my bedroom door and stepped into the hallway. The darkness felt thicker out there. Not visually. The same shadows, the same shapes, but quieter. As if sound didn't travel as far as it should. I didn't turn on the light. I stood still, listening again. No movement upstairs. No movement downstairs. The house felt empty. Too empty. I told myself that made sense. I was alone. Everyone else was gone. This was exactly how it was supposed to feel. Still, I didn't go back to bed. I walked slowly down the hallway. Each step felt deliberate, louder in my head than it actually was. I passed the bathroom. The door was closed, just like I remembered. I paused there, listening for any sound from inside. Nothing. I reached the top of the stairs and looked down. The living room below was dark. The lamp I'd turned off earlier stayed off. No glow, no movement. I stood there longer than necessary, watching the empty space at the bottom of the stairs. The smell was stronger here. Not sharp, not unpleasant, just closer. I didn't try to identify it anymore. Something about the way it stayed consistent made that feel pointless. I went back to my bedroom and closed the door behind me. The click of the latch sounded louder than it should have. Back in bed, I stared at the ceiling. I waited for a sound that would justify being awake. A footstep, a door, anything that would turn the night into something explainable. Nothing happened. Minutes passed. I checked my phone again. 1:27 a.m. I noticed then that I couldn't hear the refrigerator anymore. Usually, even from upstairs, there was a faint hum. It was subtle, but it was always there. Now, there was nothing. The silence felt intentional. I lay there until my eyes started to ache from staying open too long. Eventually, exhaustion won out. I don't remember falling asleep. I woke up again sometime after 2. This time, it felt different. The house didn't feel heavy anymore. The silence had loosened its grip just enough to feel familiar again, like a normal night returning to itself. For the first time since waking earlier, I felt embarrassed. I told myself I'd let the quiet get to me. That happens when you're alone too long. Your brain fills in the gaps when there's nothing else to focus on. I decided to check the house properly, not to reassure myself, just to close the loop. I got out of bed and turned on the hallway light. Everything looked the same. No shadows where they shouldn't be. No signs of movement. The air smelled normal again. Whatever I'd noticed earlier was gone, or at least no longer obvious. I went to the bathroom first. Empty. Then the guest room. The bed untouched. The window locked. I stood there for a moment, listening, then moved on. Downstairs, the house felt exactly how it should have all night. The living room was unchanged. The couch cushions were still where I'd left them. The plate was still in the sink. The lamp stayed off. I walked to the front door and tested the handle. Locked. I checked the deadbolt. Locked. The back door was the same. Windows secure. No signs of forced entry, no scratches, no marks. Nothing that suggested anyone had been there. I felt a sense of relief settle in. Everything made sense again. I told myself the night had just been one of those nights. Restless, quiet, easy to overthink. I turned off the lights and headed back upstairs. Halfway up the stairs, I stopped. Not because I heard something, because I remembered something. I turned around and walked back down. The front door was still locked. The deadbolt hadn't moved. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. I stood there, staring at the lock longer than I needed to. Then I noticed the chain. The door had a simple chain lock near the top. I rarely used it, especially when I was home alone. It was more habit than necessity. The chain was in place, engaged. I stood there, trying to remember the last time I'd touched it. I couldn't. I unlocked the chain and opened the door slightly, just enough to feel the cold air from outside. Snow had piled up against the step. No footprints. I closed the door again and slid the chain back into place. It fit too easily. Back upstairs, I sat on the edge of my bed and tried to make sense of it. The chain didn't prove anything on its own. I could have locked it without remembering. Muscle memory does that sometimes. Still, the thought wouldn't settle. I checked my phone. 2:46 a.m. I told myself that if nothing else had happened by now, nothing was going to. I lay back down and closed my eyes. For a while, I almost believed that. I woke up to the sound of my own breathing. Slow, controlled, too loud in the quiet room. For a moment, I didn't know what time it was. The house felt still again. Not heavy, not tense. Just quiet in the way it usually is before morning. I checked my phone. 4:11 a.m. The night was almost over. I lay there for a few seconds, letting that thought settle. Whatever had been bothering me earlier hadn't followed me into sleep. The smell was gone. The silence felt normal again. I sat up and swung my legs over the side of the bed. That's when I noticed the door. My bedroom door was open. I was certain I'd closed it. I remember the sound it made when it latched. I remember lying in bed afterward, telling myself the night was done. Still, the door stood open now, just wide enough to look intentional. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't call out. I didn't move. Eventually, I got up and stepped into the hallway. The house felt empty again. Truly empty. The kind of emptiness you don't question. I walked downstairs one last time. The living room looked untouched. The kitchen was the same. No signs of anything being disturbed. I went to the front door. The deadbolt was locked. The chain was engaged. From the inside. I stood there, looking at it, trying to replay the night in order. I hadn't used the chain earlier. I was sure of that now. Not because I remembered not using it, but because I never use it when I'm alone. I unlocked the chain and opened the door. Cold air rushed in. Snow covered the step outside, smooth and undisturbed. No footprints leading up to the house. No footprints leading away. I closed the door and locked it again. This time, I didn't touch the chain. Morning came slowly. The house filled with light the way it always did. Normal sounds returned. The refrigerator hummed. The heater clicked on. Everything felt ordinary again. Later that morning, I walked through the house one more time. Nothing was missing. Nothing was out of place. The only thing that stayed with me was how certain I felt about one detail. I hadn't brought anything inside that night. I didn't hear anyone enter. I didn't hear anyone leave. And yet, something had been able to lock the house behind me. I don't stay alone there anymore. Not because I'm afraid of someone breaking in, but because I know now that if something is already inside, there's nothing a locked door can do about it.